The Pearl of Manhattan, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansouri, one of the 10 richest men on the planet, having dinner with 5 consultants, Harvard MBAs, Oxford experts. They were trying to solve a riddle that had tormented his family for 70 years. 3 generations had failed. The Sheikh placed a napkin on the table, wrote something with a gold pen, then offered $200 million to whoever could solve it. The consultants leaned in, discussed, debated, failed. Sarah Martinez stood nearby. 26 years old, waitress, serving wine, 2 jobs, 7 days a week, unfinished economics degree from Columbia. She glanced at the napkin, and she saw it. Fibonacci sequence, golden spiral, Arabic numerology, Abjad system, geographic coordinates hidden in plain sight. Before she could stop herself, she spoke. 3 words. The room went silent. 6 pairs of eyes turned to her. The Sheikh stared in disbelief. Sarah explained. She solved the riddle in minutes. The riddle that had defeated experts for 70 years. The Sheikh kept his word. $200 million, plus a job offer, strategic consultant, $650,000 a year. 5 years later, they were married. The Pearl of Manhattan restaurant had never seen anything like it. Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansouri, one of the 10 richest men on the planet, had just issued a challenge that had frozen the blood of everyone present, $200 million to whoever could solve a riddle that had tormented his family for 3 generations. The best business consultants in America were seated at that table, ready to jump at the opportunity. But it was Sarah Martinez, 26 years old, a waitress with 2 jobs and dreams buried beneath bills, who did something unthinkable. While serving wine, she stopped. She looked at the riddle written on the linen napkin, and with a trembling but clear voice, said 3 words that would change her life forever. The Sheikh turned toward her, dark eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in 40 years, someone had solved the impossible, and that waitress in a black uniform and white apron had just collapsed the empire of certainties of a man who thought he had seen everything. Manhattan glittered under December lights when Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansouri entered the Pearl of Manhattan restaurant that night. He was an imposing man, 45 years old, over 6'3", dressed in a brioni suit that cost as much as an annual salary. The traditional Arab keffiyeh added an aura of mystery and power. Dark eyes, like the desert night, scrutinized everything with the sharp intelligence of someone who had built an empire from scratch, transforming the family inheritance into one of the largest fortunes in the Middle East. He was accompanied by 5 men in equally expensive suits, financial consultants from Zurich, international lawyers from London, business strategists from Paris, all European, all with impeccable reputations built over decades of success, all there to solve a problem that had tormented the Sheikh for years. The reserved table was the best in the restaurant. A private room on the 2nd floor with large windows overlooking 5th Avenue, illuminated like a jewel in the pulsing heart of Manhattan. The restaurant itself was legendary. 2 Michelin stars, a 3-month waiting list, clientele that included heads of state and international celebrities. The walls were lined with quality dark wood. Waterford crystal chandeliers captured the candlelight, creating an atmosphere of discreet luxury. Every detail was cared for to perfection, from the French porcelain dishes to the Baccarat crystal glasses. Sarah Martinez had been assigned to that table that night. 26 years old. Brown hair pulled back in a perfect bun according to the restaurant's rigid protocol. Black uniform pressed with military precision, immaculate white apron, shiny black shoes that hurt after 10 hours on her feet. She had been working at the Pearl of Manhattan for 3 years, always the night shift from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., after having spent the morning from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. at a crowded diner near Penn Station, serving coffee and bagels to hurried travelers. 2 jobs, 7 days a week, no vacation for 2 years. All to pay rent on a 400-square-foot studio in the Bronx, a working-class neighborhood where police sirens were the nightly soundtrack. To pay bills that seemed to multiply each month. To send $500 to her sick mother in Miami, a 58-year-old woman who looked 80, worn down by years of work as a cleaning lady, and now bedridden with debilitating arthritis that the public health system treated with frustrating bureaucratic slowness. Once, Sarah had dreamed big. A bachelor's degree in economics and business at Columbia University, one of the best in America. She had gotten to 2 exams from graduation with a 3.8 GPA when her father died suddenly. Heart attack at 49 while working as a construction worker. His death had revealed debts no one in the family knew about. $60,000 spread among finance companies and banks. Contracts signed to help friends who then disappeared. Guarantees given too generously. Sarah had had to abandon everything to work full-time and save the family from total collapse. The textbook still sat stacked in her studio next to notebooks filled with mathematical formulas and economic theories. Dust accumulated on unrealized dreams, thick as the regret Sarah always carried with her, but had learned to hide behind professional smiles and impeccable courtesy. That night, when she received the assignment to the private room, Sarah knew it meant a potentially generous tip. Clients of that caliber sometimes left $100, $200, money that made the difference between eating decently for a week or surviving on pasta and tomato sauce. She checked her appearance in the kitchen mirror, fixed a rebellious strand, took a deep breath, and picked up the tray with 6 glasses of Veuve Clicquot La Grande Dame at $450 a bottle. When she entered the private room with silent but determined steps, she immediately felt the electric tension filling the air. The 6 men were bent over documents scattered on the table, speaking in rapid, technical English, voices overlapping in a debate that seemed about to turn harsh. The Sheikh sat at the head, fingers drumming nervously on the white linen napkin, an expression of barely veiled frustration on his aristocratic face. Sarah began to serve in silence, as she had done thousands of times in her 3 years at the restaurant. She moved with the discreet grace required of high-level servers, filling glasses with millimetric precision, tilting bottles at the exact angle to avoid splashing. Invisible, almost transparent, as expected of good servers. Part of the furniture, not a real person with thoughts and dreams of her own. But then the Sheikh's deep voice broke the constant murmur with a statement pronounced in a tone of frustrated challenge that made Sarah stop as she placed the last glass. He was speaking of a riddle that had tormented 3 generations of the Al-Mansouri family, a mathematical formula hidden in a Bedouin prophecy, transmitted orally for decades before being transcribed. The great-grandfather, founder of the family fortune in the 1920s, had hidden the location of a family treasure using an ingenious combination of ancient Arab numerology and modern Western mathematics. The story the Sheikh told the consultants was fascinating. His great-grandfather, a visionary desert merchant, had foreseen the political turbulence that would shake the Middle East. He had converted part of the fortune into gold and jewels, hiding them in a secret location. Then he had created a riddle so complex that only a truly intelligent descendant, worthy of carrying the Al-Mansouri name, could solve it. A test of wit across generations. The Sheikh took a linen napkin from the table and wrote something with a solid gold Mont Blanc pen, movements slow and deliberate. Then he pushed the napkin to the center of the table with a gesture that had something desperate about it. His voice resonated in the room when he pronounced the figure, $200 million to whoever solved the riddle, and added, with an intensity that made it clear he was serious, that he wasn't joking. The 5 consultants leaned over the napkin like vultures over a corpse. Sarah, from her strategic position near the door ready to leave discreetly, managed to see what was written, a complex series of numbers and Arabic symbols intertwined with Western mathematical notation. Patterns that seemed random at first glance, but hid an underlying order. Something in that arrangement seemed strangely familiar to her, a distant echo of something she had studied years before in the classrooms at Columbia. The consultants discussed animatedly, proposing different interpretations. One suggested it was a cryptographic code based on historical ciphers. Another thought of a numerical sequence linked to significant dates. A third spoke of sacred geometry and divine proportions, but no one reached a conclusion. The Sheikh listened with patience that visibly thinned with each passing minute. Then he explained, with a voice loaded with frustration and pain, that they had already consulted the best experts in the world. Cryptographers from the NSA, mathematicians from Cambridge and MIT, historians specializing in Arab culture from Oxford and the Sorbonne, numerologists, Kabbalists, even Sufi mystics, all had failed. The riddle remained impenetrable as the desert dunes that hide secrets for millennia. The frustration in the Sheikh's voice was palpable when he spoke of the weight this failure represented. It wasn't just a question of money or material treasures. It was identity, heritage, the connection to roots that modernity threatened to cut. His grandfather had failed. His father had failed. And now he, with all the resources of the modern world at his disposal, was also failing. The pain of feeling inadequate to carry the family name, of being the weak link in a 3-generation chain, showed through in every word. Sarah should have left. Her task was finished, the glasses were filled. She should return to the kitchen for the next service. But the numbers on the napkin danced in her mind like particles in Brownian motion. There was something there she recognized at an instinctive level, a pattern that spoke to that part of her brain that had always loved mathematics with almost obsessive passion. She looked more attentively, forgetting where she was. A Fibonacci sequence hidden in the numbers, yes, but not in its standard form. Modified, inverted, combined with something else. Arab numerology based on Abjad, the system where each letter of the Arabic alphabet corresponds to a numerical value. She had studied it in an elective course on historical numerical systems, fascinated by the mathematical beauty of ancient cultures. And then she saw it. The golden spiral, the divine proportion that appears everywhere in nature, but used as a key to decode, not as a direct pattern. Each number wasn't just a number, but also a letter indicating a cardinal direction according to Abjad. And the Fibonacci sequence should be read counterclockwise, not clockwise, inverted, mirrored like a reflected image. Before common sense could stop her, before prudence and fear of losing her job could prevail, words came out of Sarah's mouth in a whisper that seemed as fragile as glass in the heavy air of the room. The silence that fell was so absolute you could hear the ticking of the Swiss watch on the Sheikh's wrist. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward her with almost comic synchronicity if it weren't so terrifying. The Sheikh stared at her with an intensity that seemed to penetrate through her. Dark eyes wide in an expression that mixed disbelief, hope, and something similar to shock. Sarah felt panic explode in her chest like a bomb. She had just spoken out of turn at a very high-level private dinner. She had interrupted a business meeting of magnates and consultants. She had overstepped all the limits of professional protocol that governed her work. She would be fired immediately. The restaurant director would throw her out without references. 3 years of impeccable work destroyed in a moment of madness. But she had started. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. She couldn't stop now. The words continued coming out, faster now, as if they had a life of their own. She explained what she saw. It wasn't just mathematics or just mystical numerology. It was a brilliant fusion of both. A golden spiral, where each number simultaneously represented a mathematical value and an Arabic letter indicating a cardinal direction. North, south, east, west, and intermediate directions. Decoding the Fibonacci sequence applied in reverse and combining the Abjad values read counterclockwise instead of the traditional clockwise, something new emerged. Not a message, not another riddle, but something much more concrete and usable. Geographic coordinates, latitude and longitude hidden in plain sight, protected by centuries of mathematical wisdom. Time seemed to stop. The consultants looked at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to annoyance at being surpassed by a waitress. The Sheikh slowly rose from his chair, the movement fluid despite his imposing height. He crossed the room in long, measured steps, took the napkin with the riddle written on it, and placed it in front of Sarah with an almost reverent gesture. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but loaded with barely contained emotion. A single word, but it contained within it a request, a challenge, and perhaps a prayer. "Show me." Sarah's hands trembled as she took the gold pen. Everyone stared at her in loaded silence. She took a deep breath and began to write on a clean napkin. The numbers came to life under her fingers. She separated the sequence, assigned Abjad values, mapped them on the golden spiral using the inverse Fibonacci progression, extracted clear coordinates 244139 degree, 543173 degree. The Sheikh whispered a single word, Abu Dhabi. The coordinates pointed to a property his great-grandfather had owned before moving to Saudi Arabia. He turned to the consultants with a cutting look. None of them, with all their degrees and experience, had gotten there. Sarah put down the pen, her knees threatening to give way. She had solved a riddle that had defied experts for 70 years. She, a waitress with an unfinished degree. The unreality hit her like a wave. The Sheikh asked her name. Then where had she learned this? Sarah explained about the university abandoned for family reasons, about mathematics that had been her passion. The sheikh nodded slowly, as if making a decision. $200 million. He had promised it, she would have it. But he also had an additional proposal. He needed someone with her mind, someone who saw patterns where others saw chaos. He wanted her to work for him as a strategic consultant, not as a waitress. A salary that would make those millions seem like an advance, access to unlimited resources, opportunity to finish her education at the best universities. One of the consultants protested coldly. That woman was a waitress without credentials, business experience, no verifiable track record. The sheikh froze him with a look. That waitress had done in minutes what 5 MBAs from Harvard and Oxford hadn't accomplished in 3 hours. Sarah looked at the man offering her a new life. She thought about the studio, the bills, the aching feet, the buried dreams. And she said yes. The sheikh's smile was genuine. His lawyers would contact her for details. That night, she was no longer the waitress. She was his guest. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Contracts that Sarah had to read 3 times before believing them. $200 million deposited in her name, plus an annual salary of $650,000. Apartment in the Upper East Side, Manhattan. Car with driver. She moved from the studio to a penthouse with a view of Central Park in 2 days. She sent a transfer to her mother, who cried on the phone. She paid all family debts. The work began immediately. Rashid Al-Mansouri had an empire spanning from real estate to technology, from energy to finance. American expansion was hitting cultural barriers he didn't understand. Sarah became his bridge, identifying hidden opportunities, seeing risks in contracts, suggesting approaches that fused Arab tradition and Western modernity. Working close to the sheikh brought something unexpected. Sarah began to know him as a person. She saw vulnerability behind the mask of power. He was a widower. His wife Amira had died of cancer 5 years before. He had dedicated every moment to work, using the empire as a shield against pain. One afternoon, 3 months later, they were working on an acquisition. Sarah had noticed an anomaly in the balance sheets that everyone had missed. Rashid looked at her with a strange expression. In the 6 months since he'd met her, she had done something he hadn't thought possible. She had made him feel alive again. The following days were torture, professional in front of others, but underneath flowed unspoken tension. Glances lasted too long. When hands brushed passing documents, the electricity was undeniable. Sarah was on a dangerous precipice. Then came Yasmin, Rashid's older sister, elegant and sharp, from Dubai to evaluate the situation. She received Sarah with poisonous courtesy. The waitress who had solved the riddle, yes, but intelligence and suitability were 2 different things. She didn't have the right blood, the right family. She was an intruder. Yasmin suggested that perhaps Sarah should take the money and leave. She had already achieved more than she could dream. Why stay where she didn't belong? After the visit, Sarah locked herself in her office, fighting tears. Maybe it was true. Maybe she had been foolish. Money bought clothes but didn't erase where she came from. Rashid found her like that, gaze empty. He didn't ask. He probably already knew. He sat across from her in silence. Then he spoke with a vulnerable voice. When Amira died, he had sworn not to let anyone get closer. It was too painful. He had built walls so high. And then Sarah had arrived and without trying had torn down every defense. He knew what his sister said, what the world said. Inappropriate, unsuitable, stupid mistake. But he didn't care. Sarah saw him as a person, not as money or a title. And he saw her, the brave girl who had sacrificed dreams for family, worked without complaining, kept the flame of intelligence alive. He took her hands. He loved her. It was complicated, the world would judge, but he couldn't pretend. Sarah cried. She was terrified of not being enough. Rashid said she was more than enough. She was everything. And he kissed her. Sweet and desperate. Taste of possibility and fear and hope. Making the relationship public brought repercussions. Rashid's family, especially Yasmin, was furious. The press exploded. The Billionaire and Cinderella, from uniform to luxury. Social media was ruthless. But Rashid faced everything with iron determination. He issued a clear statement. He loved Sarah Martinez. He would marry her if she accepted. Anyone who had a problem could address him directly. The frankness silenced many, but not all. Sarah developed thicker skin, ignored poisonous comments, judgmental looks, whispers. She focused on work, proving her value repeatedly. Her intuition saved millions. Her strategies opened new markets. Slowly, even skeptics admitted she wasn't just the boss's girlfriend. A year later, Rashid took her to Abu Dhabi. They followed the deciphered coordinates, excavating at the great-grandfather's abandoned property. They found not gold, but something more precious. Diaries, letters, photographs, family history lost in time. The real treasure was identity, connection to roots. Rashid cried reading his great-grandfather's words, discovering the man behind the legend. He understood that the riddle had never been about treasure, but about finding someone worthy of the inheritance, intelligent enough to see beyond the obvious, brave enough to risk. That night, under the desert stars, Rashid knelt with his great-grandmother's ring. Sarah, with the wind in her hair and heart full, said yes. The wedding was a fusion of two worlds. Traditional Arab ceremony at sunset in the desert, Spanish celebration at a villa by the sea in the Hamptons. Sarah's family, simple and warm, mixed with Arab nobility. Even Yasmin, seeing her brother's authentic happiness, softened her opposition. Sarah didn't stop working. She completed her bachelor's degree, then master's, becoming a recognized expert in intercultural strategies. She created a foundation offering scholarships to brilliant students from disadvantaged backgrounds, especially young women. 2 years later, Amir was born, a beautiful boy with his father's eyes and his mother's smile. Rashid, who had feared he couldn't love after Amira, melted completely. 5 years after that dinner, Sarah found herself on the penthouse terrace with Amir sleeping in her arms. Rashid reached her, embracing them both. Manhattan sparkled below, the city that had witnessed the transformation from Waitress to Sheikh's wife. Rashid asked if she ever thought about that night. Sarah answered that every day. It was the moment she had chosen to be brave instead of invisible. Rashid said he also thought about it. It was the moment he had understood that sometimes miracles come dressed as waitresses. The best thing about that night hadn't been solving the riddle or finding the treasure. It had been finding her, the true treasure his great-grandfather intended. Someone who saw value in people, not in gold, intelligence in the heart as much as in the mind. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, watching their son sleep. She thought about the studio, the double shifts, the buried dreams. How one moment of bravery had changed everything, not just for her, but for Rashid, for the families, for all those the foundation helped. She whispered a promise to Amir. She would teach him that value isn't in where you're born or what you possess, but in what you do with intelligence and bravery, that titles and money mean nothing without humanity, and that the greatest treasures aren't found in formulas or chests, but in the eyes of those who truly see you. The story of the waitress who solved the impossible became legend, told with growing admiration. But for Sarah, it had never been about becoming rich or marrying a prince. It had been about reclaiming dreams, proving that intelligence has no social class, and that when you have the courage to speak when everyone expects silence, you can change destiny. And under Manhattan stars, with family in her arms, Sarah Martinez Al-Mansouri knew she had found something more precious than $200 million. She had found where she belonged, not in a palace or studio, not in a title or uniform, but in love, respect, and the certainty of having always been enough. Give a like if you believe intelligence and bravery are worth more than any title. Comment if you ever had to choose between staying invisible or being brave. Share this story to remember that miracles can begin with a single act of audacity. Subscribe for more stories that prove how one person can change their own destiny with courage and determination. Sometimes all it takes to change a life is the courage to speak when the world expects you to remain silent. It's not diplomas or titles that define your worth, but the ability to see what others miss and the audacity to act on that vision. Because the moment you choose to be brave instead of invisible, you open the door to possibilities you never would have imagined. And sometimes on the other side of that door is not only success, but also love, family, and the realization of dreams you thought were buried forever.